today, our deep dive topic of the week is going to be what is the importance of team culture and front office in the general success of a team. Does as the Patriots say, do your job, come to work, this is a job, we're not having fun, we're here to win? Does the mindset or mantra of a team come into play in their success? Does the front office matter? Does it have any effect on a team? And we're going to dive into this today and give you our thoughts on the matter. Do you want to get us started, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll get everything going with a few stories back to my old playing days, little background into what I saw in a culture. And just for our listeners, just a little awareness. The 4 years I played in college, we had one winning season. We weren't very good. I'd say we were a little below average as a football team in D1 AA football. So this was by no means, we were not a dynasty. We were not a dumpster fire. We were kind of somewhere in between, right on the mediocre scale. And one of the things I remember distinctly about our team culture throughout that time period was just every year we just seemed to have to always pivot to a different theme, to a different motto, to a different goal. It was 1 year we always seemed to be really focused on, acting like we needed to be there, acting like we've been there before. Our mantra my freshman year was literally act as if. It just was a really weird mantra. It didn't make any sense. It was kind of confusing. 1 year we had an even better one. It was, I'm kidding you not here, it was we around. Grammatical issues aside with the phrase we around, our mantra was supposed to be, hey, we're here, we deserve to be here, we deserve to compete. So the idea wasn't really that bad, but if your team culture and team motto is based on the fact that you're showing up to the game, you're around, that's probably not a good indicator of long-term success.
Couldn't you switch it to we're around, or...
That's what I offered up very, very early on when I heard it, because, I was thinking that a lot of teams, when they played us, they would just assume we didn't pay attention in class and we were a bunch of idiots because we didn't know correct English.
I got it. It was a mental game. You tell them the mantra, they get confused and maybe think less of you, so you sneak attack them when they're least expecting it. I like it.
Yeah, well, if that was the plan, it didn't work out too well that year. I think we had a losing season, and we certainly didn't make the playoffs in D1 AA. But yeah, I think for me, looking back on my days with culture, one of the interesting things was how much we focused in school about what we called the little things. Right? It was doing these funky drills and always having doing the right commands. So to give you an example, a drill we used to do in summer workouts, which just stunk. You would just get in the line, a bunch of columns of different players. So you'd have a group of five, another group of five, another group of five, and so on. And you'd sprint 5 yards and you'd chop your feet. And when the coach blew the whistle, you clapped your hands and then you had to say whatever word it was at that line. Then you ran to the next one and you chop your feet again. And the coach would blow a whistle. Then you'd have to say whatever that word was. So the first line may be win. The second line may be team. And if you screwed it up, you said the wrong word or whatever, if you didn't say it fast enough, your group had to start over. So it really stunk. But the thing I never understood was, what value did that provide? I mean, did anyone on the roster honestly think that our goal was to not win games, or that we weren't actually a football team? Did that reassure our guys that we were a team, like this was actually a football team? Maybe with the Rio Round slogan, maybe they were concerned that we didn't have the intellectual giants to comprehend being on a team. But I don't know. It's just things like that when you hear about culture and environment that goes from the top of the organization down, and how important it is to have the right people, leading the organization and setting the right tone and structure. So that way you've got guys and players understand exactly the direction. You don't have people just, well, why are we, wondering why you're doing certain things. And if you don't have that, there's a lot of gimmicks. And I felt in college, we had a lot of gimmicks. We had the fancy slogans, or the silly slogans, I should say. We had those funky drills, and the results weren't that great on the field.
I have a question for you then, real quick.
Go ahead.
So it was our senior year that a new coach came into town, correct?
Yep, correct.
Did he have a different mentality than your previous coaches? Because, and this could just be a personnel thing, but after we left school, they seemed to do relatively well for a couple of years. I didn't know if the coach had anything to do with that. Was that luck, or they had a few deep playoff runs there?
Yeah, so there were a couple of factors. For everyone's awareness, I was a backup in college, so I like to joke I was so bad that not only did I not play, that I weighed down practice so much that after I left, the team got so much better and started going to the playoffs. But that joke aside, so definitely, so the new head coach that came in, his name is Mike Houston. He's now at Eastern Carolina. I think he's had a very successful
They're pretty
career as a
good
head.
as well.
Yeah, he's been a very successful head coach. He won a national championship, D1AA with James Madison a few years ago. So he obviously has a great career. He had a different mindset. Not so much on the sloganing and things like that that we had in the previous regime, but there still was a little bit because you still had some holdover and bleed over. Again, organizational structure. We still had, the same athletic department, the same strength department, the same, kind of structure, obviously the same school and the same administration. So you're never really going to be able to get completely away from that because that's so baked into the environment. But there definitely was a different focus and different attitude shift. To kind of give you an example, instead of doing maybe silly conditioning drills or something like that, we would do a lot more no huddle drills and stuff like that in practice. So actually getting football reps was our conditioning as opposed to just running kind of stupid sprints. So yeah, to answer your question, there was a change. I don't know if that was the reason for our success, but there definitely was a big change with the new coach. Like you said, that showed up our senior year.
I would be remiss if I did not touch on this. I would say it was successful. I think that goes to show a little bit about how front office or coaching or culture of the team can help. But the following year after we left, my wife does watch the show and listen, so I have to mention this. The Citadel did travel down to the big D1 school of University of South Carolina and pulled off one of the larger upsets in Citadel history. I do remember that. So Citadel did beat South Carolina, and the discipline, integrity, and stick-to-itiveness of the team really paid off that year.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was a big upset and a big game and big moment for the program. I think there is a little bit to be said of while the culture starts at the top and works its way down, getting the right kind of change agent, so to speak, kind of as a middle manager, which is essentially what a coach is. And, we don't really think about that, whether it's college or pro. We think of the coach as the guy who's in charge running the show. He's not. There's usually a GM and there's obviously the owner and then the ownership groups and the ownership leadership. So if there may be multiple, like a CEO, COO of that football team or director of football operations or something like that. So a coach is kind of just like the middleman. He's kind of like a middle manager. And so that creates kind of a challenging environment for the coach to set the culture. But if you get the right guy in, he can be kind of a change agent, both vertically up the organization and vertically up and vertically down to the players. And I think Coach Houston, he did a pretty good job of that for his tenure when he was at the Citadel.
And I think our first example of a pro team that does that ties into our trivia. Our seamless transitions are nothing but the best. But a great team, the New England Patriots, specifically the Brady years, and even now, I'll give you my little, I know you've prepared some stuff, but this is my 2 cents on the Patriots, because I think there's 2 models a team can have, or 3 models, excuse me. You can have a coach, a GM, and an owner. Some teams, like the Cowboys, have a coach, and then the owner is the GM. And then teams like the Patriots have an owner, and the coach is the GM, as in Bill Belichick's position. It might not be classified like that on paper, but he is the GM if we're being honest. And I think when it works, and fortunately for the Cowboys and the Patriots, they have successful models of these examples. When it works, I think it can be really good, like a Patriots organization, when somebody who is the coach has personnel input, has mantra input, has the input into the team, that he can get the players and get the draft for the culture of the team that he's looking get the pieces, the players who he wants. He typically goes after smart players. He typically goes after players who can play more than one spot on the field. Big special teams guy. I think that ability to form that culture of everybody, like you said, do your job, do things like this. Everyone has a job, and if you do your job and he does his job, we're going to be successful. I think the Patriots' ability to do those kind of things is what has brought them success.
Well, I'd even take it a step further. When I juxtapose it, another big word for you out there, when I compare it to what happened to me at school and the organization and the things like that, compare do your job with some of our slogans. And what I always liked about do your job is that it's actionable, right? You physically know to follow the team motto, to follow the sort of mantra, the goal set from the top of the organization down. Everyone knows what do your job means. It's do what you're told, do what you need to do to win that play, the game, the situation. From the water boy to Tom Brady, do your job, not somebody else's job. Don't do less than your job. Don't do more than your job. Do what your job entails. And that's very actionable. And I think that's very key when you look at an organization like the Patriots, because what is Belichick always revered in terms of his game preparation? Situations, understanding what players need to do and how they need to do it in any one of 1,000 situations that can happen over the course of a game and over the course of a season. So having that concept of do your job and having the coaching and the game planning that pairs with that, I think has created a lot of success in New England. And I really love the fact that, like I said, it's actionable. There's not one player who's sitting there wondering, what does do your job mean? How do I apply that do your job today? No, it's okay. I do what I'm told. I go in a film room and one of the coaches says, hey, this is the coverage you need to play, or this is the way you need to block this. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to execute just like that. And when Belichick goes over all the 1,000 situations and how they need to react, it's okay. I just do that. I just react to the situation the way I was coached. I don't have to worry about what the guy to the left of me is. I don't have to worry about what the guy to the right of me is. And that kind of just beating into their head and just going about it day in and day out and having the discipline to stick to that, I think is one of the big reasons that the Patriots have had a lot of success over the last few decades.
And that kind of reminds me of another, do your job. It reminds me, this is kind of a funnier, jokier thing, but in the same vein, it is true. When I was going through the police academy a while back, there was a teacher, who was talking to us, and there's this kid who would talk too much, think that he knew it all, try to give examples of stuff, and he didn't know anything. But we were all in school to learn. But what this teacher said is, I'll get you to act it out for me, Nick. He said, take your arms and put them out straight in front of you. Just straight like this. He said, that's your lane, stay in it. So, do your job, stay in your lane. Don't focus on what Tom Brady has to do if you're Wes Welker or Julian Edelman. You focus on your routes. You don't need to know what Tom has to know. You need to know what your job is. You focus on your stuff, and if you can do your thing to the best of your ability, we're going to have success.
Yeah, and like you said, I think the important thing, while that motto is good, the fact that he sticks to it and the discipline, and like you said, they draft smart guys who are able to apply those different concepts, in that team, I think is all part of it. Another example of good culture, I know it's near and dear to you, is what the Ravens have set up over the past, since Ozzie Newsome became GM in the 90s.
Absolutely.
I know you've got a lot of thoughts on that. I'll let you go ahead and dig into that a little bit.
So on the screen now, I have the quartet of Ravens front office and culture. You have Joe Ortiz, Director of Player Personnel. You have Ozzie Newsome, who is now an advisor, former long-term GM for the Ravens. You have Eric DeCosta, who is now current GM of the Ravens, and John Harbaugh, coach of the Ravens. I think the only person is Steve Biscotti, who's the owner. He is not pictured here. And I think this team of guys is why Baltimore has had continued success, consistent playoff team. You never hear too many issues or crazy things come out of the locker room. You never hear too much about team problems. They don't really have guys that have off the field issues too terribly. I mean, it does happen from time to time because that's just the nature of the beast. But they're quick to move on from those people. Perfect example, because I have it pulled up already. Two guys who I think of are, and I think this is one thing that is in Baltimore makes them successful. This past 2 years ago, Earl Thomas was signed to Baltimore. Great player in Seattle, revered as one of the best safeties in the NFL at the time. But all of a sudden, he started having conflicts. He got in a fight with one of the other safeties, Chuck Clark, on the team now, who's the starting safety. He had weird off-the-field issues. We don't really have to go into something about his brother and him doing some things that were undesirable. And he just started to be a distraction in the locker room. Baltimore had paid this guy a lot of money to come play safety. What did they do? Cut him out. He's gone. We're not going to have distractions. We're not going to break apart the team's culture because of one player. Another example, I don't know why, it also happens to be a safety, Bernard Pollard, the Patriot killer. He really was on Baltimore for their Super Bowl run. He did a lot of great things in Baltimore. He was a very solid player, hard-hitting Cam Chancellor-like strong safety. But near the end of his career, he was bit of a locker room cancer. He created rifts in the team, and they didn't care how successful he was or how much they had to pay him. They cut him. They moved on from him. And I think that's another sign of a good team, and that's one of the hallmarks of Baltimore, is they care about their culture, and they don't care who you are. If you were Ray Lewis and you started to become a problem, they will move on from you to keep the culture of the team together. But speaking of Ray Lewis, that brings me up to the other point. The biggest thing about Baltimore, I believe, and their mantra, you say the Patriots' mantra was do your job. Baltimore's mantra is play like a Raven. They have the embodiment of the Raven, tough defense, ground and pound offense, really just a lot of grit, next man up type thing. It doesn't matter who we are, we always got a chance in the game. And these three guys on the screen right now were who started Baltimore's culture. You have Ray Lewis, you have Ed Reed, and you have Terrell Suggs. These are the guys who embodied that Baltimore defense that was so dominant and is always a force to be reckoned with. They would embody the culture of the team, and they would kind of pass it on to anyone who came in. They would say, hey, you're messing up. We do it like this. You can't act like this. When Bernard Pollard was acting up, I believe Ray Lewis and Ed Reed went to the coach and was like, hey, I like the guy, but he's causing a problem. He needs to go. And Harbaugh said, okay, he's going to go. These guys were the leaders of the team. They were leaders on the teams when they were in college. And drafting good players with strong leadership abilities has been a great ability of Baltimore, and I think that's why they've been so successful.
Yeah, and I think there's a good duality there between what New England and Baltimore have been, right? You have New England where it all comes to Belichick. Like you said, he's the coach, but he's also the GM, or he de facto is in that role, and he has all the control over the organization. It all flows from Bill. Bill sets the tone. Bill sets the goals. Bill sets, the mantras, the themes, the motifs, the culture, right? It's sort of what, there's one guy, and then there's Belichick, and then there's everybody else, right? Baltimore's a little different. Baltimore is all about delegation of authority. You got Biscotti, the owner, who let Newsom run the general manager with DaCosta. DaCosta now is the GM. And they handled a lot of that scouting, that player personnel, that drafting, the free agent moves, but they delegated the actual coaching and player management to Harbaugh. And Harbaugh, in turn, delegated the leadership of the players and the day-to-day to the leaders on that team, the Ray Lewis's and Ed Reeds of the world and the Terrell Suggs of the world that you brought up. And it's just two very different ways of doing it, but both are very, very successful. And it tells you there's no necessarily right or wrong way to do it. You just have to have the discipline, the forthrightness to stick with it if it's a good plan. And I think that's one of the reasons why Baltimore has been really successful. They understood, once they, Biscotti, Newsome, and then DeCosta, because this was before Harbaugh, right? They won a Super Bowl with Billick in 2000 when Brian Billick was the head coach. They understood that their strategy was going to be, we're going to draft players that we want to be leaders. We're going to delegate the coaching to the coach, and we're going to focus the front office on the front office, and we're going to focus the players are going to control the players. And that's what we're going to stick with. For better or for worse, that's what we're going to roll with, and we're going to focus on that from the top of the organization down. So what does that mean? It means you have scouts and GMs who are really bought into doing a great job scouting and finding diamonds in the rough and having great draft picks and making the right moves because they know that's their lane. That's what they're in charge of, and they're really committed to it. You have coaches that are obviously dedicated to coaching and making sure they're focused on developing and game planning and not worrying about the GM and the scouting, right? Because that's a different delegation of authority. And then you get the leaders on the team and what they can focus on leading the team. And so there's a lot of parallels there, right? Because what I just said sounds eerily similar to do your job. But instead of it being, hey, I'm Tom Brady, I do Tom Brady things. That's what I'm focused on. The Baltimore is almost, like set up compartments. They've set up like little departments in their team. Say, hey, this segment is responsible for that. GM scouting is responsible for that. You have coaching is responsible for this. You have players that are responsible for this. And like you said, it's been really, really, really successful. I wonder if you think that, maybe if there's some time in your fandom, if you felt that Baltimore should have done things different, or have you really felt that they've done a pretty good job organizationally since as long as you've been watching them?
Well, this shows why I'm not an NFL GM. One thing that they do, and that's why John Harbaugh never questions. And there's been two trains of thought, okay? In the draft process, they did best player available regardless of need. And that was the Newsome area. And that's when we had such a great defense because there was a lot of underrated defenders who would slip through because I don't know why people value offensive players a little bit more than defensive players. We wouldn't necessarily draft a wide receiver, but we'd get another linebacker. We'd get another edge rusher. We'd get another offensive lineman. And we would always pick up these players no matter what our need was. And I would always be like, oh, we need receivers. We don't have any receivers. And they would keep getting defenders. They would keep getting offensive linemen. And we just developed a team that was absent of receivers. And we would pick up serviceable receivers in free agency, and it's a model that worked. It was good. It may not have been what I thought they should have done, but they had a plan. They would get Anquan Boldens. They would get Michael Crabtrees. They would get Steve Smiths, Mike Wallace's, anybody they could to help the team going forward. They've gotten John Brown, Sammy Watkins, all kinds of guys. Well, we've moved into the DeCosta era, and it's similar. It's best player available, but they do factor in need a little bit. We have been drafting more receivers in the first round, but we've also drafted edge rushers. We also saw them jump up for a quarterback when we didn't necessarily need one because Lamar Jackson at 32 we saw as an extreme value pick. We could not let him get out of the first round there. We thought people were crazy for letting him go. They jump up and grab him. So I think it just goes to show there are a lot of different ways to do things. And if you ask somebody like me, I'm probably going to make the wrong decision because I haven't been doing it for as long as they have. But when a team has continued success, there are ups, there are downs. And if you try to focus on the downs too much, you're going to burn yourself because you say, oh, maybe we should move on from this guy. Maybe Harbaugh had a bad year. Maybe he should be gone. Maybe we should get a different coach. They're running the ball too much. We don't throw it anymore. Why are we running the ball so much? Well, there's a reason we're running the ball so much because we're good at it and maybe we don't have the tools to pass. And then you see, okay, now next year we've worked on our passing game. We're getting there in the passing department. So when you have a good team, you have continued success, you have to trust the model and trust the process.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the big themes is continuity and consistency. Continuity, consistency, discipline, they're all kind of the same thing. But when it comes to the organization, how it's structured, I think that's downright critical. I think an example of the opposite of that is the New York Giants, head up by owner Mara is their owner right now, and they've got Dave Gettleman's the GM. And, the Giants have been one of the worst performing franchises in the NFL over the last decade. And it seems every 2 years, the Giants have a massive pivot, right? They had Coughlin for a while and had some success, hard-nosed, discipline, run the ball defense. Then they switched. They brought in Pat Shurmur. Oh, they're going to be high-flying offense. He was offensive coordinator. He was going to develop Daniel Jones, and they're going to be high-flying, aggressive offense. Well, that didn't work. Okay, they're going to pivot now to Joe Judge, special teams, complicated defense, Patriot guy, doing more of the do your job kind of mentality. And it's not that any of those coaches, specifically Sherman or Judge, are bad coaches or don't know football or aren't good at evaluating the talent and game plan they have, is that it's such a pivot all the time. And it takes so much energy to get all your players to go from this direction. They've been doing this for 1 or 2 or 3 years from the previous coach, to flip their mentality so much, and then to keep up with everybody else that isn't having to flip that. And that waste to transition all the time, that mindset, I think that's why so many franchise struggle. And I think that's why the Giants really struggle. One of the reasons why that Green Bay is so good every year, as an example, you look at other teams that are really good all the time, but it's not just Aaron Rodgers. It's the fact that their team, their identity is always kind of the same. You always kind of know who Green Bay is. You always kind of know how they're going to play, what their themes are going to be, what they're going to look like, what's their style. They're kind of calm, cool, relaxed. No big deal. If we start slow, no problem. We're gonna fight back and we're gonna catch our groove. And just having that mentality and that just feel in the locker room and the environment and the team goes a long way. And contrast that to the Giants, who you just never know. It feels like a shift every year, their mentality. I think Gettleman, their GM, 2 years ago, he was all about being big, explosive offense. Let's get Barkley and Daniel Jones and let's get them going. And then last year, he says, well, we're going to draft all the big uglies. We're going to draft and bring an offensive lineman. They get Andrew Thomas, left tackle. And then this year, they're focused more on, we want to be big and explosive. They signed Kenny Golladay. They drafted Tony out of Florida, the wide receiver. And so it's just all these pivots all the time. It's just hard for players and coaches to constantly have to react and adjust how they play and how they handle their day-to-day. In the business world and the operational world, they call that waste, because you're spending time doing things that aren't related to you being a better football player, because you got to pivot from one thing to the other. And it creates all kinds of issues. And we're seeing it with how the Giants have struggled.
And it's like you said earlier, off the air, the Giants really have a lack of identity. They don't know who they are. Like you said, they went one way this year with the draft. They went another way this year with the draft. They go another way this year with the draft. And like you said, the push-pull, the waste of resources. Like, if you want to go this way and say you draft Barkley's and Daniel Jones's, and then you decide to go the other way and do all the big uglies, you're counterproductive on how you're going to go, and you're not ever really going to, like you said, need continuity, go forward. Another quick example of someone who does do that, and it has gotten them some success, is you always think of the Oakland, now Las Vegas Raiders. When Mark Davis was, dad was around, Al Davis was there, the one identity, I'll tell you, when the Raiders drafted a receiver, what did they look for?
Speed, fast.
The fastest guy. You got Darius Hayward-Bay. Unfortunately, this one didn't pay off. They have Henry Ruggs, who's no longer with the team. But they always wanted the guy who had the best 40 time. That was their indicator, and they stuck to it. It wasn't always the greatest, but they did it, and they were consistent about it.
Yeah, and to your point with the Raiders, and people can say, well, Darius Hayward-Bay didn't work out. Henry Ruggs obviously isn't going to work out. Oh, they did those bad strategy didn't work. People forget the Raiders are first in the AFC West right now, right?
Yeah.
They fought through the John Gruden issues, right? The Raiders have been to a Super Bowl in the last 20 years. They've been to playoff games. They've won division titles. They've been competitive. They've had some bad years, but they've had a lot of good years too. And the reason is they're consistent. Right. So if you miss on the draft, hey, maybe you can't be a championship team because you didn't get the guys. Darius Hayward-Bay was a bust, for example. But because you have continuity and consistency in your organization, you still have a certain amount of success. I think that's one of the reasons my team, Dallas, has a certain amount of success, over the last 15 years or so, even though they haven't won Super Bowls or gone to any for that matter, is because Jerry Jones and that organization is usually very, very consistent. Ever since they got Jason Garrett, who certainly had his issues at a head coach, they had a very similar theme and consistent theme, and it worked out really well. And they were able to, while they weren't winning championships, they were consistently in the hunt. And I think that's what having consistency does. It keeps you in the hunt.
And it's like when I think of Dallas, I think of strong offensive line play. Since like the early 2010s, they've always had a top-tier offensive line if they could help it. Always had some of the best offensive linemen. You see a tier list of O-linemen, Dallas has at least one guy from center, guard, tackle that's in the top 5. Always, always, always. They've always focused on having strong running game, whether it's Zeke and Pollard, whether it was DeMarco Murray, Emmitt Smith. They've always had strong running backs. Recently, they've always had pretty gunslinger-esque quarterbacks, and Romo and Staubach and Aikman and now Dak. And they've had pretty good tight ends. That's another thing I think about Dallas is good possession tight ends with Jason Witten and now Schultz. That, like you said, they're always consistent in how they draft and how they do things, and it keeps them consistently in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I want to bring up an example. I talked to you a little bit off air about a team that's kind of in the news a little bit now, and that's Miami. And they were a team a few years ago. They were doing all the tank rage, trading away a bunch of players to pick up a bunch of draft picks, and it was a strategy, right? And their whole plan was to tank, build up picks, trade away their best players, and then build up a nice, deep, talented young roster, and then have a lottery salary cap to make some moves. And last year, things turned around. They won 10 games. It looked on the rise. But the problem with Miami is they couldn't help themselves. They couldn't be consistent. So what did they do early in the season? Tua has a few injuries. He's linked to some struggles. All the conversations about Deshaun Watson come up, right? Miami can't stick to the plan. General manager Chris Greer, I think a lot of blame falls on him. He's the guy in charge of that. While Brian Flores, who's their head coach, while he's trying to develop a culture, of whatever he wants in that locker room. It's very similar to the Patriots, I believe, with accountability, and doing your job and all that kind of stuff. Chris Greer can't help himself, right? He can't help himself and stick to the plan. He's got to link himself to Deshaun Watson. He's got to think of a big move that, he can make to maybe turn the season around. Look, Miami's had a rough season. Obviously, they've lost, I think, 7 games in a row now. They are falling apart fast, but you have to stick to the plan to a certain point. They won 10 games last year. This was a team that was a dumpster fire a few years ago. They've turned it around last year. They've had some injuries. They've underperformed. But look, if you believe in your plan and you believe in what you've done the last couple of years, stick with it. Don't bail. Trade everything you tanked for. Trade all the picks. Trade Tua just to get Deshaun Watson, a guy who you hope can cure the remedies. It's an unnecessary pivot. And then, like I said before, these kind of pivots lead to waste, and they never work out for franchises.
And that's, I think, a hallmark of bad leadership, bad front office, is when a team starts to buzzsaw down players for draft picks. I think that's a hallmark of bad leadership and bad culture. Miami cutting Minkah Fitzpatrick, cutting Laramie Tunsil, cutting these guys and sending them away for as many draft picks as they could get. And it's just not it's not a great game plan. Jacksonville did this. They sent away Leonard Fournette. I believe another guy they sent off, Dante Fowler. They had another good linebacker that they sent off as well.
Miles Jack, I think.
Miles Jack, they sent off. All kinds of players that they just said, okay, we're just going to, cut down every solid player we have and try to get draft picks and develop a young roster. Another team who's notorious for this, the Texans. They sent away Dwayne, is his last name Brown? The tackle. Sent away Dwayne Brown. Sent away DeAndre Hopkins. Craziest thing that you could possibly do. They're cutting this team. Jack Easterby and Bill O'Brien. They were literally trading away all pros for like 6th round draft picks like no one's business. Another team who was doing this, the last one I can think of, is the Raiders did this, and they have been successful, but still, if I was the Las Vegas Raiders, I would hope that I still had Khalil Mack, and I would hope that I still had Amari Cooper. Those are two guys that they sent off that there was no way, if I am a GM of a team, I'm letting those guys go. Bona fide all pros, like edging on possible Hall of Famers. Khalil Mack was an instant game changer at the Bears. Amari Cooper, instant game changer at the Cowboys. And it's just crazy. They have never been able to replace those guys, really. And I think that if they would have had those guys, they would be easily one of the top teams in the AFC.
Yeah, and the thing with roster moves, it's sometimes you're going to make good ones, you're going to make bad ones, but we're going to keep hitting the nail on this head because I think it's really, really important, is to be consistent and stick to your plan, right? Houston's entire plan was to build a team around Deshaun Watson. They drafted Deshaun Watson. He turns into a pretty good player. They're like, we're going to build a team around him. We got DeAndre Hopkins. We got Dwayne Brown. We're gonna build a really good roster around him, and they didn't do it. They started shipping off guys. They traded Hopkins because they wouldn't give him a big deal. They they got rid of Dwayne Brown, like you said, and that just your whole plan, your whole strategy was to build a roster ready for Watson, and then 2 years later, you didn't like the guys that you built around him, so you got rid of them. You just blew up your entire strategy. And I think that's the part that really frustrates me with some of these GMs is they don't have the patience and the discipline to stick with it. Obviously there's a chance it doesn't work out and you lose your job. And I understand that happens and they're trying to avoid that. But you have a much higher likelihood of success if you stick to your plan. Jimmy Johnson said it best one time. He says, look, if you stick to a plan and get out of the way, 20 out of the 32 NFL teams will find a way to screw it up. And I used to kind of think that was kind of strange, but when I watch what some of these GMs do with all their pivots and their changes year to year and how they always have to, coaching turnover, player turnover, different strategy changes, Hall of Famer Jimmy Johnson is onto something there. I think so many teams, and you brought up, a couple really great examples. I've hit on a few of them already. They just can't get out of their own way and they keep, just doing dumb stuff in the front office. And all these culture shifts and strategy shifts, it just creates a bad environment. And that's why half the NFL always seems to be struggling and not being competitive and not being in the hunt.
My last two examples I want to touch on, because they're very similar, are the Cleveland Browns comparatively to the Los Angeles Rams. I think they're two very similar teams, and there's two big differences. The two big differences are Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry versus Les Snead and Sean McVay. Good front office, good coaching. Bad front office, bad coaching with the Browns. The Browns, a team where if you go through a list, there's probably like at least out of the 22 starters, 10, 11 superstars on that team. Same with the Rams. Out of 22 starters, easy 10, 11 superstars on that team. Both teams should be hard-charging front runners of their division. The Browns are almost like battling for last place in the AFC North, while the Rams are division leaders trying to make a Super Bowl run. Why is that? Because consistent coaching turnover from bad front office moves, bad plays by the general manager and the ownership of the team, and just like we said, no consistency. The Rams, they had a plan. They stuck to it. They were consistent. They said, hey, we're in win now mode. We're going to trade away the bank, but we're going to get the best players and make a playoff Super Bowl run. And they have not backed off of that. Their most recent move, trading for Von Miller, they said, hey, whatever it takes, we are going to win a Super Bowl. And they have been pretty successful because of this. They keep retooling the team with free agents and bringing guys in, trading away future draft picks. And if you want to stick to free agency and go with the assured thing rather than trusting yourself in the draft, that's fine. But like we said, you just have to stick to it. And I think these are like two clear-cut examples of similar strategies that are wildly different results.
Well, they appear similar, but there's a big contrast there with Cleveland. So LA, you touched on it. They're all about the trades, bringing in the veterans and the free agents and paying them to build a really top-heavy team. Cleveland, for a few years, they were about accumulating draft picks, and they got a lot of draft picks, a lot of young team. But then they switched it up, right? They brought in Jarvis Landry. They made big moves for Odell Beckham, right? They brought in Jadeveon Clowney, a defensive end this offseason. So they kind of try to do a dual-pronged approach, and that just doesn't work. It wasn't very successful. Baker Mayfield is a young quarterback. He can't manage Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham's attitudes and egos.
Exactly.
Right? When you bring in a combination of young players and try and grow them and develop them, but pair that with seasoned veterans who have had a lot of success in the NFL, it's not going to work very well. Cleveland was heading down the young develop path. LA built their team with free agents and veterans. And LA had a lot of success. Cleveland got a little worried that things were going slow, so they pivoted to veterans. But the problem is they pivoted and they kind of didn't stick to their plan, and it didn't work out very well.
Mixing and matching doesn't work too often.
Not at all. Look, the Rams are a great example. They drafted Jared Goff, right? But they decided, hey, look, we went with this guy. We thought Goff would become a seasoned veteran. We thought we'd kind of walk into him being a seasoned veteran. Turns out he's not a good veteran. Let's get rid of him. We'll trade more picks. We'll get our veteran, and we'll get Stafford, right? They kind of kept sticking to their plan and keep reiterating their strategy of bringing in senior veteran guys, maybe hoping some of their young guys become that kind of player. But if they don't, we'll get them out of here and we'll bring a star player in, or at least an experienced player in who can handle that environment. It's very, very interesting because we always think of these GMs and coaches as understanding so much about the players they have in the environment, but evidence shows they do not. They lack the patience and the discipline to really be successful.
And I think that goes to show, like we said, good front office versus bad front office. If you have a coach and they're always worried about what their job is, if it's in question, whether they're going to get fired or not, they're not going to stick to their plan. They're not going to execute. When teams feel confident and they know that they're going to be able to implement their plan no matter the results, and they have time, it's a little bit easier for them to come out. And that all goes back to the front office. But I think that was good. Do you have any last words on culture and front office, Nick?
No, I think that was good. That's a good talk. I think it's one of those things where a lot of fans and you see it, you see the news, and you kind of wonder why the heck this happens at the NFL, why some teams are successful and some teams stay out of the news. And sometimes it's as simple as having just consistency and continuity, in the front office in terms of strategy and decision making. Not pivoting all the time, just being consistent and focused on a certain message can go a long way in the National Football League and college football, and frankly in other facts of life too. It's interesting talk. Great talk, Miles. That was one of our best deep dives. I think that was pretty enlightening. Big brain show as always.